Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Reality check. Organized capital crushes disorganized labor every time, without question. And we're living through another moment where organized capital is doing just that. Today, I wore my Working People's Day of Action t-shirt from back in 2018 when we were talking about, how do we fight back against the Trump administration's attack on organized work? How do we fight back against the deregulation and all of the swing of regulatory power that Trump was putting in the hands of corporate America? Now we have a virus that is doing even more than they could have imagined. And the pandemic is proving once again that the moneyed interest, they're going to be fine. Regardless of what happens, the moneyed interest in this country are going to do really, really well. And, it comes down to one of these moments where you look at what we talked about last week on the program, how the billionaire class has not only done really, really well, but they've actually gotten larger. And in fact, the really extremely wealthy got even more wildly, insanely wealthy. In fact, during the pandemic time, which they're saying is sometime between March 18th and June 17th, which is when this study was done. They found that, $584 billion flowed into the pockets of our heavy 643, because we've got now 643 billionaires. At a time when families are struggling to put food on the table, at a time when families are struggling to make ends meet. This is one of those moments where at some point, we have got to stand up and organize and say no more. Because here's the weird thing. In April and in May, we know that commercial real estate properties saw their rents dry up. About half of commercial real estate properties the rents went unpaid for the months of April and May. And what we know is the little guy's going to get screwed no matter what, because organized money has tons of lawyers, because our government has done very little, if anything, to kind of weed that out. So it's going to end up in the court system. A lot of stuff is going to end up in bankruptcy courts and in judgments where if you've got a team of lawyers, you're going to probably do all right. If not, you're going to end up bankrupt and broke and, desperate. And the working class of this country, sorry, you don't have a team of lawyers on your side, which is why, again, every time one of these downturns happens, every time one of these collapses happens, we suffer. We, the working people of this country, are the ones who struggle. We didn't get the $1 trillion slush fund like the Mnuchin Trump GOP $500 billion slush fund that is being just sucked dry by corporate America. Big business, they get this. They also get that if they're not sucking money out of the trough, they know that they can take on huge amounts of debt, and our Federal Reserve is going to buy it up like crazy. They're going to buy up tons of it. And the thing is, if you thought corporate America was in debt before the pandemic, which it was a huge concern about, just wait till we're on the other side. And wait till you see who's left holding the bag as their profits once again soar. And we're left with, hey, sorry, we got to cut Social Security. Hey, sorry, Medicare's got to go. Hey, sorry, we can't fund education. We can't fund healthcare. We can't fund infrastructure because we gave all the money away to the billionaires and the wealthy corporations who didn't need it. Now, look, I'm one of the first people who says, look, we need government to increase spending during these times. We need to increase demand. We need to prime the pump. We need to get things moving, but we need to spend in a smart way. And, I go back to my Economics 101 class where the professor was very clear. There's good debt, there's bad debt. Handing out money to corporations, bad debt. Ensuring that workers have jobs by, maybe a jobs program, maybe infrastructure, maybe who knows. Good things. What we need is another stimulus to help bail out Main Street, not another dime for corporate America. Not a dime should have gone to big business. Not a dime should have gone to a publicly held company or to the wealth class of this country because they don't need it. Should have gone to those small businesses who are out in the streets risking their lives just to reopen to save what they've got. It should be going to those families who are concerned that come June, July, August, they're going to end up being evicted from their homes. They're going to end up being foreclosed on. We don't know what's coming yet. But I'll tell you what we've got. We've got a government that's just not listening. And this most recent idea coming out from the Republicans, first it was Trump's little baby, Explore America. Now Martha McSally, the senator from Arizona, she's come out with a great idea. It's the TRIP Act. Yes, the TRIP Act, the American trip. What can be more American than the American road trip? What she's proposing is a $4,000 per person tax credit, $500 per child. So if you're a family of 5, you're looking at what, $9,500 for 2020, 2021, 2022. So that's a lot of tax credit and a lot of vacation if you have vacation time. And here's the great part of this. There's nothing in there that says you poor working schlubs who don't get vacation can actually take advantage of this. This, again, is another one of those moments where they've devised a plan to ensure that their buddies, that their donors can cash in and suck off the government teat. And again, this is not new. They've been doing this for ages. They craft these plans to make sure that they can profit from them. Because guess who's going on vacation? People who can afford it. People who have vacation time. They're going to be the ones. So they're going to be the ones to benefit this. Which is why I think they've only proposed, I think, $50 billion for it. And I'll tell you, I can personally come up with a ton of better ideas than spending $50 billion to pay for rich people to go on vacation. It just seems dumb to me. But I digress. We do need to help industry. And this is one of those moments where you go, we need to help some industry. But does it have to be the big chains? I mean, I look at the Orlando Sentinel reported, I guess it was about a week ago, that tourism in Florida had taken a massive hit because that's why you go to Florida. They pointed out that the Wyndham Hotel and Resorts Incorporated, that they had turned in the first quarter of this year a $22 million profit. They also said that 95% of their franchisees had applied for government money. So they're already being taken care of there. Disney turned a $520 million quarterly profit. They're expected, according to the Orlando Sentinel, to save $150 million through this new corona-related tax credit. Also, they point out that the Miramar-based Spirit Airlines, which lost $28 million in the first quarter, is expected to get somewhere about $500 million to $1 billion in tax dollars to help them. Reserve is just sucking up. And the thing is, what are they doing with this money? Well, they're pocketing a good bit of it, but they're also fighting any progress for working people. And this is one of the things that I keep saying anytime you see these pieces of legislation come forward. What's in it for the workers? Because guess what? They're not going to get vacation time to be able to take advantage of it. They're just going to be exploited again. Also, the Orlando Sentinel points out that the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association evidently is raising money because there's a constitutional amendment being pushed around through the state of Florida to increase the minimum wage up to $15 an hour by 2026. So they're raising a boatload of money to fight that. Now, the thing is we already know tourism workers, they're the ones who end up being shafted most often anyway. They're the ones who are most likely going to get screwed. In fact, they point out that the average wage in the country is about $711 a week, whereas in tourism, it's like $300. And you go, how is that possible? How do people live on that? And the sad reality is well, through more government programs. We end up paying for it and paying for it. Why? So corporate America can put more in their pockets. And it's just another one of those moments where at some point you have to begin to ask the question of, when are we going to start investing in better ways? When are we going to start spending money in much better ways? Because look, we shouldn't be handing out money to these big corporations. We should be helping the working people who are struggling. And the thing is we're in another one of these moments where we get these kind of, gimmicky bills of, hey, everyone take a vacation if you can get time off. And the argument is we're going to save those industries. The sad reality is it's not. People who are going to take vacations, they're going to take vacations because they've got the money to do it anyway. Most people, they're struggling to make ends meet. I can think of a better way to spend $50 billion. If we spent money on food stamps to make sure kids got fed. We know Mark Zandi at moodyseconomy.com, he points out that for every dollar we spend on food stamps, there's a reverberation effect of a $1.73 increase in our GDP. A dollar better spent. We know that if every $1 billion you spend on infrastructure creates somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 jobs. And good paying jobs, not those tourism jobs that they seem to want to continue to throw around. Also, the National Institute of Building Sciences, in 2017, they released their Natural Hazard Mitigation Saves Report. And they said for every dollar that we put into disaster mitigation, the three federal agencies most affected, FEMA, HUD, and the Economic Development Agency, save $6. So I can tell you, I can think of a whole bunch of reasons we can spend $50 billion a lot better. We can make sure that people get to stay in their homes. We can make sure that people don't go broke from their student loans. We can do a lot better things than making sure that some rich guy can take his kid to Disneyland. Or maybe we can just make sure that those workers don't lose their homes. Because here's the thing. I had someone email me and say, well, I haven't seen the poverty rate go through the roof. And you go, that's true. We haven't seen the poverty rate go up. And I would argue that it has a lot to do with the fact that our government did spend some money and get money into people's pockets. Not enough, not fast enough, but some. And that poverty isn't inevitable. Poverty is a choice. Our government can make the choice to ensure that we don't have millions of people ending up in poverty, which is now what I'm saying. Today is the time we need to be fighting for a healthier, a chunkier, a more robust CARES kind of act with federal and state and local spending to ensure that the states don't go belly up and that they don't end up cutting education and millions of jobs across this country. There's so much we can do, so much better we can do at $50 billion than to just say, hey, here's a tax credit, rich guy, more for you, just so we can have a minimum wage job. How about, better yet, we take that money, have an actual jobs program, create the kind of jobs that we want, doing the things we need to get done, so that, one, we've got family-sustaining wage jobs for people to support themselves and their family with dignity and respect, and we also get something on the other end. Just kind of a thought. I'd love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. Would you want the $4,000 tax credit to go on vacation? And the other question I got, do you have vacation time to go with it? rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
American, then workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day the despised Taft-Hartley Act became law. It was a direct retaliatory response to the 1946 post-war strike wave, where millions walked off the job after waiting years for basic demands. The labor movement mobilized against the slave labor bill through numerous rallies. The AFL joined the CIO in threatening 24-hour strikes across whole industries in protest as the bill wound its way through Congress. 11,000 soft coal miners in Pennsylvania walked out in a spontaneous protest strike earlier in the month. The bill passed over the veto of President Harry S. Truman, who would invoke it a dozen times over the course of his presidency. Many union leaders hailed Truman as a friend of labor for his 11th hour veto. Labor Party advocates were incensed that of the 219 congressional Democrats, 126 voted in favor of the bill. Practically overnight, the labor movement had been pushed back 25 years. Taft-Hartley was nothing short of disastrous for the American labor movement. With the stroke of a pen, the act criminalized many of the actions key to historic union victories in the 30s and 40s. Jurisdictional strikes, secondary boycotts, solidarity strikes, closed shops, and mass picketing were just a few of the most basic trade union activities now outlawed. The act helped fire the first shots of the McCarthy Red Scare by mandating that union officers file non-communist affidavits with the government, which was later found to be unconstitutional. The act also provided the ammunition needed to strangle strikes by empowering the president to easily acquire strike-breaking injunctions. And it allowed for the rapid growth of right-to-work laws at the state level. And because of Taft-Hartley, the union movement has suffered ever since.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I gotta tell you, I'm still amazed that there's anybody who would support Donald Trump after the statement of, we just need to test less. It's not that, there's just too much testing going on. That's why the cases have gone up. That's why we're having a spike in the first round. This isn't a boomerang. We haven't finished the first wave yet. But I'm amazed that anyone would even listen to this guy at this point, whose theory is if we just tested less, we would have fewer cases, which is just mind-numbingly incompetent. But again, it not surprising coming out of this administration, which is why, again, I found it interesting today that Donald Trump was being pushed on whether he was joking during his rally in Tulsa when he said that he had asked officials to slow down the testing, didn't want to give the wrong response. And it was one of these things that, maybe there was a moment of honesty here. Because as he was being pushed, if he was joking, he said, "I don't kid." Maybe this is honest. And the thing that gets me is the White House is saying that, well, he was just tongue in cheek. He was just joking, and he's saying, no, I'm deadly serious. And this, again, is another one of those moments you go, there's nobody in charge. There's nobody. And it's no wonder we're seeing the second wave spiking of this first wave. And that's why I have asked Jeff Hauser to come talk with us. Jeff is the executive director of the Revolving Door Project at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Jeff, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, anytime, Rick.
So are you as baffled by this as I am? Because I'm looking at this statement. If we just tested less, Jeff, there'd be less sick people.
Yeah, I think the way to understand Trump's appeal is that he says the things that some people want to have said. And so his whole persona is that I'm the type of person who will say the uncomfortable truths. He attacks political correctness. And there are these weird moments of candor in which he confesses that he is as racist or sexist or any number of different, or avaricious. He is greedy as all heck. He indicates he is all these different things that people imagine that they might themselves wish they could be, that they could get away with. And so sometimes he lets people in a little on what actually happens in the government, what happens in the administration, and how he approaches issues. because when he is doing something that polite society would consider ridiculous, he thinks that that's the basis of his appeal, is that he does stuff that sounds wrong to a lot of people, the liberal elites. But here, where he messed up is, you don't have to be a liberal elite to think that we should be able to test for COVID-19. That is not a liberal issue. It's not a conservative issue. It's like a basic common sense issue. And so he went too far. It was meant to be humorous insofar as it reflected Trump's version of humor, which is to say the thing that annoys the New York Times editorial board or the like. But it turns out it also annoys a lot more people. And that's why his staff tried to clean up and say it was a joke. But Trump, who never wants to admit a mistake, can't even let the staff clean up for him. Yeah. And so he's telling the truth, I think, which is that he's not joking, and that he is part of the reason why America's testing has never caught up to what it needs to be. I mean, China just had, and obviously I'm not defending the Chinese government, it's an authoritarian government, et cetera, but China just had a little bit of a burst in Beijing, and they tested basically the entire massive city immediately. Like, that is competence, and that is something that Donald Trump is the exact opposite of.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, just on the common sense part of this, the sad reality is it's just idiotic for anyone to say, if we just tested less, no one would be sick. I mean, it's just insane. But I guess this is where we are. And it's so bad that I don't know if you saw this report from the European Union. They're actually considering barring Americans from coming into their country because we've screwed this thing up so badly.
You know, I mean, Donald Trump said racist, offensive things about certain countries that, you know, from Africa and the Middle East, and he used a profanity to describe those types of countries, and he was going to cut off tourist visas from them because they're sort of, and it was a racist, and he called them backwards, and it was terrible. But the EU is saying that about the United States, and they kind of have a point. I mean, the US has the most cases of coronavirus. The number of cases is increasing. We are a real danger to the rest of the world. I mean, we all, as members of humanity, have a mutual interest in reducing the number of people who have COVID-19. Our odds as individuals of getting it go down the fewer people have it. And alternatively, the more people who have it, that's just more virus in the world. It lives in people. We need to get it out of people. We need to reduce the spread. America is the laggard country, which is not doing its part to help humanity. And so, yeah, I would shut a nation or a group of nations' borders to the U.S. if I had the option. It's totally, unfortunately, rational for the EU to treat us like this.
Yeah, because here's the thing, and I think a lot of us do it to ourselves. I don't know how things are by you, but where I'm at, about half the people they're just don't care. And you go into, I was in one of the Home Depots today, and about half the people don't have masks on. And, I put it on because, I want to be respectful and courteous of the workers who have to deal with all of this stuff. And the sad reality is it's not the employers who aren't protecting them. Our government isn't protecting them. I feel sorry for these frontline workers who don't really seem to have, unless they're a member of a labor union, any way to protect themselves from people.
No. And I mean, unemployment benefits, the extension is about to decrease. So you're in a situation in which the unemployment rate is high. And I mean, if you quit your job because it's not safe, you're not sure what's going to be the situation with respect to unemployment benefits, and you have to feed your family, and people are having to make extremely difficult choices between personal and maybe even familial safety versus economic security. America doesn't have the safety net that other advanced countries have, and these are just difficult choices for these workers. And yeah, I think what we're seeing is, in terms of the fraying of mask usage and social distancing behaviors, responsible ones, is that it's pretty hard for society to organize itself without leadership. And America right now, we're a rudderless country. We don't have leaders, and so it's, in some ways, the glass is half masked. It's good that half the people are wearing masks, and it's terrible that the other half are not.
Yeah,
and
which
the
is
honest
why,
truth is, yeah, please go ahead.
Which is why when I saw the New York Times editorial board ask the question, and a very simple question, why is OSHA AWOL in all of this? It got me thinking because, I look at these workers who are on the front lines, the cashiers, the stock people, the people at the grocery stores, the nurses, the doctors, all of these folks. And now that, in Pennsylvania, that we're mostly green and people are being forced back to work, they don't, like you've said, they don't have a choice. And I said from the beginning, before they force people back to work, they should give workers a true choice. Extend the unemployment benefits with the extra $600 and give people a real choice. You want to go back to work? Or you want to work for the wages that you were working for? You can do that, or you stay home and you collect the unemployment benefit. It is truly a choice.
Yeah, I mean, the OSHA is one of those very little parts of the executive branch that has an acronym. I mean, it's hard to even remember the occupational safety. And I, honestly, I'm even forgetting the H, and I work on these
Health,
issues.
Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
But the basic point is, this is the part of the Labor Department that's supposed to look out for the safety of America's workers, and it has basically the same number of people working there as it did 3 generations ago. And the American population has massively increased, and they have fewer resources and fewer rights. And so they're the ones that tell employers what to do to keep their workers safe.
Right.
Now, the Center for Disease Control, that gets a lot more attention with respect to the pandemic. But it turns out that the people at the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, don't get to tell employers what they need to do to keep people safe from a virus. Even though it's their expertise, that power rests in OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and that is run by Eugene Scalia, the son of the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. And he is a long-time corporate attorney who has as much disdain as is humanly possible for unions and working people. And so he has done nothing to protect America's meat packers. And basically, we have the same virus across the world. We have fundamentally the same job, meat packing. The job is worse in America, both because we don't have antitrust laws, so America has fewer meat packers in bigger plants than in the rest of the world, although there's been excessive concentrations elsewhere. But we have fundamentally the same job and fundamentally the same virus. But the only country in the world in which a lot of people who do that job are dying is the United States. And that's because America has weaker unions, and we have a government that is entirely employer run. This is not the case in Europe. It's not the case in South Korea or Taiwan or Japan. These countries are all dealing with the same job, the same virus, and we're getting by far the worst results. And that shows you why having a corporate run executive branch is so bad for ordinary Americans.
Yeah, I know. We keep hearing all the time that corporate America they're gonna do the right thing. They'll police themselves. We don't need OSHA. And to highlight, what you had said a second ago is we're at a historic low number of inspectors for OSHA in the country right now. Back during the Reagan administration was the height, somewhere just north of 1,200 inspectors they had, now down under 900. And the economy is, exponentially larger than it was back in the 1980s. So, that statement, it'll take like 140 years to inspect every workplace in this country is accurate.
Yeah, I mean, 900 maybe could handle California, but to handle the entire country, there's just no chance. And the fines that they can impose, I mean, they impose them rarely and they're trivial. And so basically a rational, amoral employer is going to cut all sorts of corners because they can get away with it. It is a rational play. And yeah, there's just no way the marketplace is going to work here. It's not like workers have the ability to figure out what the safety level of a given factory. To become an inspector at OSHA, there's a lot of training. You don't want every worker to get a job to have to become an expert in safety. That's something you need specialists to do. And so workers don't have a way to figure out in advance who's the safer employer, who isn't. And so that kind of gives an incentive for employers to be the ones whoever cuts the most corners and has the cheapest product is going to win. There's just nothing to rein them in unless you have the government.
Yeah, at the end of the day, when you have someone like Trump who admittedly, wants to slash regulations, wants to basically allow the Wild West of the workforce to flourish, it puts us all in a very dangerous situation. And look, this is one of those moments that I keep telling people. It's not just you or me. I'm just not worried about myself. I'm worried about all of us, because what happens to you eventually could happen to me.
Absolutely. I mean, you judge a society by how it treats the people with the least social capital. It's not like in Europe, the meat packers tend to be the highest status people. They're often immigrants within Europe themselves. They often come from Eastern Europe. But there's still just a basic assumption that even if there are issues, anti-immigrant sentiments and problems within Western Europe, there's still just a basic level of decency with which they treat all people that is a lot better than the US. It's not as good as it should be. But we're just failing morally. And this is the type of thing that you would wish the Democratic Party takes more seriously and makes a big deal out of.
No, and this is one of those moments, that I keep going back to the Democrats in the House, who I don't think have done a good enough job to protect workers. This is one of those moments that I think you should be out on the Capitol steps screaming about the lack of protections coming out of this government, the lack of oversight from OSHA, the lack of their holding employers accountable and demanding safer workplaces for people. Look, if we're pushing people back into the workplace, if we're telling them, hey, things are okay, it damn well better be.
Yeah, I mean, there are towns dotted across the country that have these large packing plants, where these packing plants have become the epicenter of the virus in those areas. And I'm sure that, as you said, we're all connected, and so the spread to people who don't work at the plants is going to go up because of that. And then someone who gets the virus that way is going to go travel and visit a relative 100 miles away. This is how you keep the virus alive. If we had done social distancing more seriously, I mean, they're playing baseball in South Korea. The Bundesliga, the German soccer league, is just about finishing up their season. I mean, they are so far ahead in returning to normalcy. And the U.S. can't get there because we did a lot of social distancing, and many of us did a ton of social distancing, but we didn't all do it. We didn't have the right leadership. We are not treating our workers well enough. And as a result, we are having the worst COVID-19 pandemic of any developed country. And our death totals are popping back up when the rest of the developed world, things are getting better.
Yeah, well, not surprising considering, again, we've got a guy who just says, hey, if we just didn't test, it'd all go away.
Yeah.
Sad and scary. But Jeff, I appreciate the thoughts. I appreciate the time. Thanks so much for the work you do.
Thanks for having me.
Good stuff. Jeff Hauser, Executive Director of the Revolving Door Project there at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you opening up where you are? Are you seeing the distancing? Are you seeing the masks? Are you seeing good behavior? I'd love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day that many labor historians mark as the beginning of a long decline of the U.S. labor movement. The United States Congress passed the Taft-Hartley Act. The bill was named after Republican Senator Robert A. Taft from Ohio. The son of President William Howard Taft, the senator had been a staunch opponent of President Roosevelt's New Deal policies. He continued his anti-working class efforts with a new bill aimed to curb the power of unions. He found an ally in Representative Fred Hartley, a Republican congressman from New Jersey. After World War II, a wave of strikes washed over the nation. Most labor unions had agreed not to go on strike during the war, but frustrations over wages and working conditions mounted. In the years after the conflict ended, 5 million workers walked the picket lines. 1 in 4 private sector workers was a union member. Labor was on the march. The congressional Republicans passed the Taft-Hartley Act in response. The bill ushered in limits on the right to strike. It also began the era of so-called right to work, allowing states to pass laws making it more difficult for unions to collect dues and represent workers. The new law also required union leaders to sign affidavits that they were not communists, bringing the Red Scare to the House of Labor. A massive rally at Madison Square Garden in New York City asked President Truman to veto the slave labor bill. President Truman did veto the bill, but Congress overrode his veto. Today, only 12% of workers are in unions. 26 states are so-called right-to-work states, to the great detriment of workers' living standards and their health and safety. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, as we've been talking about, the reality is I don't think this administration has done enough to keep working people safe. I don't think they've done enough to help families stay secure. And we're seeing another rise on, especially in the southern states. And, my daughter came home and said, her former boss was, traveling throughout the South because this is all a big hoax. Well, we're now seeing the result of that theory. It's a big hoax, and they went about their way. And now the numbers are jumping up, and they're going to get worse. And now, we're afraid. And again, this is what I've been talking about from the beginning. We need to protect people on the job. And that's why I've asked my next guest to come talk with me. Everett Kelly is the national president for the American Federation of Government Employees. He recently testified before Congress telling them that there was no need to race or to rush back to reopen to get government employees back on the job, and that we need to take the necessary step to protect workers as we do open by doing the smart stuff that we've been talking about: universal testing, strict social distancing, and of course, personal protective equipment. Everett Kelly, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So here we're in this moment. We're seeing, we had a huge spike. It dipped for a little bit, and then it was, hey, go. Everything's great. Go. Everything's wonderful. And now we're seeing it pop back up again.
Absolutely. And that's been our greatest fear, too. Cases are starting to spike. As states begin to reopen, many of them are seeing spikes for COVID-19. Just last week, 10 states saw, a record number of cases. Now, it's not the time to be returning federal and D.C. workers back to the work site.
No, it's insane to me. But here again, this is another one of those moments where you've got a leader who doesn't care about people. He doesn't care about workers. And it shows in these decisions, and which is why I think it's so important. And I keep emphasizing the fact that in this moment, particularly, having a union stand up and speak out and demand better is a matter of life and death at this point. Absolutely.
The bottom line is, this administration has been bent on silencing, the unions. They issued executive orders stripping, unions of their right to collectively bargain. And it is my belief that had the various agencies allowed the union to negotiate with them or just sit at the table and come up with great ideas as to how we can re-enter to the workforce, or in the event that we had opportunity to negotiate PPE and those types of things, I think we would have seen less people affected by this pandemic.
Right now we're seeing, what I found interesting is that now they're talking about at the airports having the TSA do temperature checks on people. And, it was one of these moments where, there's as if the TSA doesn't have enough to do and enough responsibility. We're now going to kind of put them in charge of making sure that this virus doesn't spread without training, without proper equipment, and without any procedure on how you deal with people. It just seems, again, that there's no leadership and no thought that goes into some of the stuff that they do.
So that's typical of this administration. These people are hired to protect and secure the flying public. They are not medical care professionals. You need a medical care professional to be testing people for COVID and, taking temperatures and those type of things. You're exactly right. They have not been trained for this type of process.
So let me ask you, as the president, the national president of the American Federation of Government Employees, what are you guys asking for? I mean, at the end of the day, people, they need to work. People are going to need to be able to support their families. Businesses are demanding to be reopened. How do we move to this place of ensuring that workers are safe as when they go home as when they showed up, that people don't get sick on the job, and that you have a say in what goes on? What are you guys asking for?
Well, AFGE issued preconditions for reopening on April the 22nd, I believe it was. We sent a letter to the acting director of OPM and OMB opposing the administration's premature reopening plan for federal agencies. As of today, we've not really received a response, but we laid out 6 preconditions for reopening the workplace. One was, universal testing for COVID-19. Secondly, science-based standards for the safe return to work. 3 was to treat all employees the same. In the return to work, in the accommodation, arena. Fourth is federal workplace must be safe. There must be safe workplaces. Fifth, the systematic employees must be, sent home on leave. That's a must. And then comply with all the bargaining obligations with their union. These are the 6 preconditions that we sent to OMB and OPM, and I think that, these 6 preconditions must be met, along with following the guidance, that's issued by, CDC.
Right. So you've laid out what you want, and we have an administration that's just telling you, shut up and go back to work.
That's exactly right.
And that's what I get from this administration. And sadly, this is one of those moments where what comes out of our government, what comes from our leadership, filters down to corporate America. And it's the kind of responses that I'm hearing from people who are going to work in various other industries. That, look, this is how the government did it. This is how we're going to do it. So this administration is basically setting the standard for how the rest of this country responds.
You're exactly right. In a total disregard for human life, total disregard for safety measures, safety precautions, and a total disregard for the workers in their union.
Here in Pennsylvania, one of the things that happened is, our government decided through the Turnpike Commission to do away with all the toll collectors as a very opportunistic, and I'm dead set against it, and I'm a fan of this governor. This is another one of those moments where you see the opportunistic folks who they're going to take advantage of this and basically push through their agenda. And I've been seeing that happen with you guys, in the VA and all across our government, that this administration is using this crisis to not only to weaken the power of you and your members, but to also destroy your ability to do the oversight and to hold them accountable when necessary.
I mean, it's apparent that this administration doesn't want anyone to even speak of the word oversight. That's why you see attacks on anyone that will be a whistleblower. You see attacks on employees that may report an issue, and the idea is to put fear in the employees so that they don't communicate with the union, or they don't communicate with Congress, or anyone. So that's just a tactic that this administration has chosen to use, and they continue to use that.
Yeah, I mean, this again is one of those moments where you think of all the things that our government employees do, from keep making sure that our water is clean, our air is clean, that the food we eat is safe, that the drugs we get are safe, and yet, at every turn, this administration is doing what they can to undermine it. So the question that I have for you is, this is another one of those moments where I don't think the average American quite understands the magnitude of the damage this administration is doing to the people who keep us safe every day, that we don't know their names, we don't thank them, there aren't parades, there aren't holidays for them, but those are the folks who get up every day and do the work of we the people, and they're being attacked.
You're absolutely right. You know, I mean, from every aspect of the sector, you know, you have federal employees, you know, at the Department of Agriculture, DOD, you know, at Education, at Energy, EPA, the National Park Service, you know, even at OPM, you know, and then you have the state services here in DC. You have the VA, you know, you have the Border Patrol, you have the Bureau of Prisons, you know, and all of these entities, you know, help make America operate every single day. And, you know, they are just been taken advantage of, and this administration is dead set on destroying them, you know, and we have to take a stand, you know, and I've been calling on my union to take a stand, you know, and, you know, come, you know, this November, I hope we can see a change, you know, in this administration so that, you know, people can get back to servicing the American public without fear, you know, and those types of things. Very patriotic employees.
Yeah, and maybe have some sanity of leadership. Now, you guys have been, and one of the things that I talk about quite often here on the program, Everett, is that, you know, every worker in this country should have a union. They should have a contract, someone to defend them. You guys have been doing a really great job of this. I know you guys have filed multiple lawsuits against this administration and as they attack your members. And I understand you just today, or I guess it was yesterday, that the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia denied a motion by the Federal Labor Relations Authority that sought to dismiss one of your lawsuits that would hold them accountable, and they were trying to challenge the constitutionality of the appointments of Federal Service Impasse Panel. I'm curious, why is that important?
Well, it's important because the Federal Service Impasse Panel, you know, gives some, I guess, some guidance, you know, as it relates to negotiability issues, right? We can file an appeal to the Federal Service Impasse Panel, and as long as they have a semblance of, you know, a process, you know, then we stand a chance of them ruling in our favor. If they say that the impasse panel have no authority, then we have no place to go.
And then what happens to you is, and the reason I brought this up is because I think most people don't understand, you know, how like a grievance procedure works and how having some kind of due process on the job is a good thing. Sadly, in this country, most people go to work and they work in a fiefdom. There's the boss and they're the workers, and it's a master-servant relationship. Instead of in a unionized workplace where you come together, you deal with problems, and you do have mechanisms in place to solve and to adjudicate these problems.
Absolutely, and it's so important, you know, because, you know, and I kind of like to see it as, you know, checks and balances. You know what I'm saying? And that's all we do. You know, is sometimes point, you know, a different spin on a situation to management, right? And in many instances, they're very appreciative, you know, of the fact that we can point a different spin, or, you know, sit down at the table and talk through an issue. I mean, for instance, you know, we have been discussing the possibility of a number of years. We've been doing that here of late. And the bottom line is, you know, we are seeing so much increase in production. We're seeing, you know, backlogs diminish because, you know, it's very effective. And only thing we need sometimes is to be able to sit at the table and make some recommendations.
Right. No, at the end of the day, the person closest to the problem, you need to have their input. And again, it's one of these situations where instead of having a master-servant relationship like we seem to, like the Trump administration seems to want, actually having some input from all sides and working together as a team, well, that seems to be, well, something more positive. But Everett, I appreciate the time and the work that you do. I hope you'll come back and share some more thoughts with us real soon.
Anytime you can invite us on, we'll be there.
Good stuff. I appreciate it. Again, as I've been saying for a long time, you need to have that contract. You need to have that say in the job. And Everett Kelly, I appreciate the time. National President of the American Federation of Government Employees. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Chances are you've heard of black lung, the deadly disease that threatens coal miners. But have you ever heard of brown lung? On this day in labor history, the year was 1978. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, adopted standards to fight this workplace hazard. Brown lung is caused by breathing in cotton dust. Sometimes the condition was known as Monday fever. Workers in textile mills, especially mills with poor ventilation, are at risk from brown lung. Health officials first recognized the potential threat of brown lung in the 1930s, but it took almost half a century for comprehensive federal workplace safety standards to be implemented on this issue. At the time the new regulations were passed, it was estimated that 35,000 workers suffered from brown lung. This meant that 1 in 12 workers in the industry suffered from this agonizing disease, with another 100,000 workers at risk. Symptoms of brown lung include coughing, wheezing, and difficulty breathing. Severe cases can result in heart failure and death. From 1974 until 1986, the not-for-profit group, the Brown Lung Association, organized around this workplace safety issue. The organization worked primarily in the Carolinas, but also did outreach in Virginia and Georgia. The Brown Lung Association held its first breathing clinic at a church in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1975. It went on to hold similar clinics in other southern cities. The group ran media and lobbying campaigns to bring attention to the issue. They also helped workers file compensation claims. Thanks to OSHA and groups like the Brown Lung Association, in the 1990s, the number of deaths attributed to brown lung had fallen to 81. According to OSHA, the instances of brown lung have fallen to 0.01 cases per 10,000 workers. The fight to end brown lung is just one part of the struggle to ensure workplace safety in the United States.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I said at the beginning, this administration is going to use this pandemic as well as they can. You know, it's the old Milton Friedman, never let a good crisis go to waste. And also the Milton Friedman, it's the bad ideas that are lying around that you use when crisis hits. So all of the stuff that we're seeing, these are bad ideas that all of these think tanks and all of these state policy network folks have been dreaming up for a while. You don't think that this Martha McSally bill, the American Trip Act, just came out of nowhere. This was the brainchild of the tourism lobby, who spend millions of dollars hiring really smart people to think of bad ideas to be able to drain tax dollars from you and me. And it sounds like a great idea. Hey, well, I could take a vacation. Until you realize most people in this country don't get vacation. You don't get paid time off. And the other side of it is how many people are going to be able to afford the tax credit to pay the money up front in the hopes that you get it down the road. This is another one of those moments where the wealthy are just going to get wealthier. It's another little bit. It kind of reminds me of the charter school thing. And, I've had this argument, for years over the charter school thing because, I know a number of black friends who think, charter schools are just the greatest thing because they got this. It's not those crummy public schools that they went to, the crummy underfunded, old, falling, broken down public schools they went to. No, these are better. They've got shiny knobs and all of that. And the voucher programs that came out of all of that, where corporate America is just sucking money out of all of this stuff. The voucher program in particular. Most people, when you get the golden ticket, they can't afford to pay the rest of the tuition. Years ago, we had a state senator here on my program who supposedly wrote the voucher bill for Pennsylvania. And I asked him, if I get this golden ticket, can I send my kid to one of the really exclusive schools in Philadelphia, which is like 40 grand a year? And he said, yep, pay every dime. And it's right in his legislation that you get what your school district pays, which at the time was like $8,000 or $10,000, something like that. So I'd had to come up with the rest of it. Yet he believed that it was going to be the golden ticket, and it wasn't. All it was a handout to rich people who were going to send their kids to the schools anyway. And this is the same thing. This is another piece of legislation that's going to benefit the wealthy who are going to do it anyway. So we're just going to hand out money to people who are going to Disney World anyway. Instead of saying, hey, you know what, how about we take that money and make sure that those workers are made whole until the industry comes back around. But I know that worker-centric kind of idea is impossible with this administration, because their mindset is still in taking us back to the bad old days where workers were exploitable, where they're expendable, and where they, seen and not heard, used and never considered. They're taking us back in a hurried fashion, and because of this pandemic, in a much quicker way, back to the days of Lochner, back to the days where if you were hungry enough, desperate enough, and your kids were starving, that you'd work in deplorable conditions for poverty wages. Hey, that's your liberty, buddy. It's your liberty. It's your liberty of contract. Yes, you could work 100 hours a week for sub-minimum wage, and that was your liberty. We're hearing the same voices today, because some of the ideas that are kicking around on the fringes are undoing a lot of the things that built the middle class of this country. What we need to be doing is we need to be pushing for a higher minimum wage. We need to be pushing for job guarantees. We need to make sure that people who, when they have jobs, get benefits like vacation and have a wage high enough to where they don't need a tax credit to take their kids on vacation, that they can afford it. And I know it's a radical thought. It's a radical idea that your work should pay for your life. I know it's radical. I know it's crazy. It's way out there. But we've done it. We'd had it at one point, and it was either stolen from us or we voluntarily gave it up for more rich people. Because again, what this pandemic has shown us again is that the very wealthy, they know how to enrich themselves. They know how to do very well. Thank you very much. And that we're easily exploitable. We're easily divided. The fact that, and this is the mind-blowing part of this, if you watched Trump's rally and you watched some of the people who were out there defiant of sanity, I'm not wearing a mask, we don't need no stinking mask, and you see people every day who are telling you that by their actions, we're divided on a mask. We're easily that pitted against one another. Let that sink in for a second. This is why I said at the beginning, organized capital crushes disorganized labor every time. And right now, as a labor movement, we're totally disorganized. As a working class in this country, we are completely exploitable. Which is why we didn't see the 90% wage that even a conservative like Joe Walsh was pushing for. That workers weren't given the choice to stay home or go to work. That there wasn't an option, that there wasn't a safety net. And that people in the coming months are truly worried about, are they going to be able to pay their rent? What happens when the protection from not paying their mortgage gets taken away? And look, they didn't get mortgage forgiveness for the months that they missed. That's just tacked on to the end. They just didn't get penalized with fees now. They're still paying for it. This is one of those moments, and I keep coming back to this because I think it is so important to understand. If we don't wake up, if we don't come around, things are going to get much, much worse. And if we don't wear those damn masks, and if we don't take this seriously, we're going to be fighting this for the next year. And it's going to be bad. And you're going to think 120,000 dead is a lot. Just wait till the end of the year where they're predicting possibly as many as 300,000. Something seriously, seriously wrong. It's just insane.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Many Americans can't believe that political coups are part of our country's history. But consider the Wall Street Pooch of 1933. Never heard of it? It was a corporate conspiracy to oust Franklin Roosevelt, who had just been elected president. With the Great Depression raging and millions of families financially devastated, FDR had launched several economic recovery programs to help people get back on their feet. To pay for this crucial effort, he had the audacity to raise taxes on the wealthy, and this enraged a group of Wall Street multimillionaires. Wailing that their, quote, liberty to grab as much wealth as possible was being shackled, they accused the president of mounting a class war. To pull off their coup, they plotted to enlist a private military force made up of destitute World War I veterans who were upset at not receiving promised federal bonus payments. One of the multimillionaire's lackeys reached out to a well-respected advocate for veterans, retired Marine General Smedley Darlington Butler. They wanted him to lead 500,000 veterans in a march on Washington to force FDR from the White House. But they chose the wrong general. Butler was a patriot and lifelong soldier for democracy who in his later years was critical of corporate war profiteering, and he was repulsed by the hubris and treachery of these Wall Street aristocrats. He reached out to a reporter, and together they gathered proof to take to Congress. A special congressional committee investigated and found Butler's story, quote, alarmingly true, leading to public hearings with Smedley Darlington Butler giving detailed testimony. This is Jim Hightower saying, by exposing the traitors, this courageous patriot nipped their coup d'etat in the bud. But their sense of entitlement reveals that we must beware of the concentrated wealth of the imperious rich, for it poses an ever-present danger to your and my majority rule.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown. From Wall Street to Washington, this monthly newsletter reveals who's doing what to whom and why. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So on Sunday, NASCAR said that they were angry, outraged, cannot state strongly enough how seriously they take this heinous act of there being a noose in one of their garages in Talladega. Evidently, the noose was found in Bubba Wallace's garage stall there in Alabama. They also went on to say that the display of the Confederate flag will be prohibited from all NASCAR events and properties. And wow, did the, other Bubbas go crazy. Today, though, a statement from NASCAR says that the FBI completed its investigation at Talladega Speedway and determined that Bubba Wallace was not the target of a hate crime. The FBI report concludes, and photographic evidence confirms that the garage door pull rope, fashioned like a noose, had been positioned there since as early as last fall. They say that this was obviously well before the 43 team's arrival and garage assignment. We appreciate the FBI's quick and thorough investigation, and we're thankful to learn that this was not an intentional racist act against Bubba. We remain steadfast in our commitment to providing a welcoming and inclusive environment for all who love racing. And it got me to thinking, which is worse? Would it be, or is it worse, if someone hung the noose in Bubba Wallace's garage, or is it worse that it's been hanging there all this time for well over a year, and it now just dawned on someone that it probably shouldn't be there, and that people just walked by it like, that's normal. I'm not quite sure. I'm here to share some thoughts on, well, this and a number of other things. I've asked our good friend Propane Jane to come talk with us. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back. I'm so glad you started with this because I'm totally confused by this as well.
So which is
what
worse?
What is going on?
Yeah, I mean, which is worse? Is it worse that had they put it in there targeting this? And I don't know who Bubba Wallace is. I don't follow NASCAR at all.
Yeah, I just found out all of this like within the last 24 to 48 hours. So I am by no means an expert on this, but I agree with you. I don't get how like it's been there this whole time. And if it actually did look like a noose, why was that okay and not something that was already like investigated and rectified and taken away like prior to now?
Right. No, according to the photographic evidence that they've put forth, there it was. There's no question that there's a noose hanging from that door. And it got me to thinking, well, hey, it's just the culture. So which is worse? Is it, would it have been worse had they put it there, to threaten him, or that's just the culture?
I think it's actually the culture. I mean, I think that's the larger issue that I continue to think about, and in particular because I have a wakelet that used to be a Storify that's one of my favorite threads, and it's called Confederacy Gate, and it started basically in 2015, right after the Charleston shooting. And, to me at the time, again, being a Texan, being a Southerner, really feeling like since I was a child in elementary school that I had a firm grasp on, like, this Civil War history revisionism and the heritage and the tradition of all of that, right? So when all of the Charleston shooting happened, and in the days after that, one of the first people to come out, one of the first organizations, institutions to come out and say the Confederate flag needs to be banned, it needs to be taken down from the State House in South Carolina, was NASCAR. Okay, and I went back today and actually found the tweet because it's from June 23rd. Oddly enough, 2015, where they made this announcement. And I said at the time, oh my goodness, is this what hell freezing over looks like?
Yeah, because, I've never been to a NASCAR event, but I've seen one on TV once, and you assume that's part of, it's the Dukes of Hazzard.
Well, exactly. And I was just about to say that, like, whether you've been to NASCAR or not, I mean, I think that in American pop culture, we could easily point to the Dukes of Hazzard. Like, again, as a young black kid growing up, the Dukes of Hazzard was on. We watched it. We loved the Duke brothers. I mean, it was a whole thing. And so there's like the Daisy Dukes. I mean, there's obviously a lore for that idea, and clearly there was the car attached to it that had the Confederate flag.
Right, and I'll tell you,
it was on lunch pails, and it was a thing.
Right, but I'll tell you, from my perspective, and I watched the Dukes of Hazzard, and with Jesse and the whole 9 yards, and Roscoe and the rest of them. I watched mostly for Daisy. Yes, I never, growing up in Cleveland, I never understood what that symbol was. I never knew what it meant. And right. I believe that or don't, but it was never something. It was never something that was in my consciousness. It was never something that I had thought about until years later when I met the most racist people who were flying that thing.
Yeah, I mean, again, and I think that's why it was able to be like this very mainstream thing in American society, and it could be on lunch pails, and it could be a thing that kids thought was cute, and it could be like literally to this day flying around on state houses and in like college, in their insignia, in their uniform, in
right.
their whole culture of their school, in the fight songs of these schools. I mean, when you start digging it, and then they're digging into the fraternity parties, and then they're going, oh wow, all this blackface and all of these Klan. And then suddenly it's like this can of worms. But again, in the South, it's not necessarily like this is a secret. I mean, this is a known thing. You know, I went to the University of Texas. We have the six-pack. Literally, I mean, like all of the busts, all of the statues on the six-pack, even when I was in college from, 1999 to 2003, were still these Confederate figures. So, and this is while the university is putting a MLK statue on the campus, and at the same time, right? So it's like there's this history that people want to think about as ancient history without also recognizing that, no, there's a whole, like, society and culture that's still built off of this, that still thrives every day. And it's not just NASCAR that, again, is having to come out and reissue statements, because, again, they did this 5 years ago. Maybe not a lot of people paid attention, but 5 years ago they had to do the whole, hey, guys, maybe we shouldn't have the Confederate flag flying around here. 9 black people just got shot in church, and we need to take the lead on this. And at that time, Walmart and a bunch of other corporations, and even the GOP to some extent, at least the congressional GOP in D.C., tried to pay lip service to this is like an issue that matters, so that nobody would look into the fact, I think, that as a party, they still are very much in bed with these white supremacist, extremist elements in our society, these hate groups. And that's why it's been so hard to police the internet. That's why it's been so hard to, get the election system secured. We're still continuing to see the infiltration of these hate groups into our military. So now the military is now having to come out. The Navy has done this in recent days. The Marines, to where they're having to say, hey, we have a plan for removing the Confederate flag from barracks, et cetera, et cetera. But how many hundreds, we're over 150 years past the Civil War. How is the actual established armed forces just now saying, hey, guys, we shouldn't be letting people fly this treasonous flag in the U.S. Armed Forces?
Yeah, we shouldn't allow them to fly a flag that we had to defeat, and that
right.
we literally shed blood for. No, you're right, but there's a lot of this that goes on, though, and just now we're starting to see some of these icons, some of these symbols, like the flag on the Dukes of Hazzard car being addressed.
Right.
For instance, now we're seeing that Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's and Mrs. Butterworth and Cream of Wheat.
Yeah.
And all of these things that, again, as a white guy looked at, go, that's why are we still doing this? Kind of dumb. But somehow it kept around.
Yeah, and what's been so interesting, I think, is the reverberations, because it may be that it's so built into our society that for a lot of us we don't necessarily think about it. But I think in the reaction to what's happening now that it's going away, somebody posted, they sent me this link that they saw, and somebody was commenting about how sad they were. It was an older white man, and he was saying how sad he is that Aunt Jemima is going away, because she reminds him of this like hired help that they had. and he's like
that's probably the wrong response.
Well, the thing that was so bizarre about it, right, is that he's like simultaneously saying it, but then knowing he needs to defend it. So he's like, even though she worked for us as a maid, my parents still invited her to parties and events, like not.
Yeah,
as,
someone needs
like,
to clean up.
Like, well, but he's like, in parentheses, like not to work, like as a guest. And I was, always disappointed anytime she couldn't make it. And it was just so tone deaf, right? And obviously he's thinking back to the mind of a child that's not necessarily grasping that we have this black woman in our house who, yes, we may, endearingly, feel some sort of way about, but at the end of the day, are you still upholding institutions of white supremacy and institutionalized racism? Like, does this individual go out and vote Republican?
Yeah, but here's the thing, and this is what you seem to forget. that the Democratic Party, they're the party of the Klan and white supremacists. I'm told this all the time, Jane. It's the Democrats who started it, damn it.
Yeah, and it's funny how, how do you explain black people not having got that memo for the last 55 plus years, right? I mean, are we really going to, perpetuate stereotypes and racism by assuming that black people haven't figured it out, and that we're on this plantation of Democrats and welfare and whatever, and that's the only reason we have 90+%, of the black vote going to the Democratic Party since the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act was passed.
Right. Yeah, but again, that's a hole that you fall down. That when there's no other argument, that's what they fall back on.
Oh, of course, they have to. I think they have to. And again, I think that's why this moment when we talk about these symbols coming down and these elements of Americana, and we get back to the psychology of it, it really is a radical situation for these people inside of their brains, because this is the mythology, this is the folklore that they were raised on. They have a nostalgia for their childhood. They have a nostalgia for all of the things they've been told about American society, about their family's heritage, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just, taking down a name from a pancake syrup or a box of rice. It's also having to rethink this whole idea of, this slave master and slave dynamic. And again, we have this conversation, it seems like every couple of years, because somebody, think back to the whole Paula Deen thing. I don't even remember what year that was now.
Yeah, but it was the only thing I ever knew about Paula Deen, and it wasn't
right.
good.
Exactly. Like if you weren't necessarily following her cooking, exploits, you didn't really know anything about her until it just became this big story that she wanted to have this like slavery themed, antebellum themed restaurant, and then this whole culture of people having weddings at plantations and reliving this dream of Gone with the Wind, and again, Gone with the Wind. How popularized and mainstreamed that imagery is in our society. I think it's folded into our national identity in ways that if you're a white person in mainstream America, it may not even be apparent to you on the front of your brain. But if you belong to a marginalized group, particularly if you're a black American, those images have always seemed off. Like when I think about my childhood and I think about my family, we've always talked about the just irony of Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben, and it's sort of a joke.
Yeah, I never understood the Uncle Ben thing. Aunt Jemima I got, because she probably made a mean pancake. But I don't know what Uncle Ben was doing with the rice. But here's the thing. I had a listener the other day tell me that, Aunt Jemima just lost her job. She's on the unemployment list, and and now Aunt Karen's going to take over.
Yeah, she's going to have to. Who else is going to do it?
Yeah, can't we just have syrup?
Well,
and this is the question. This is one of those, because I've had this conversation of, all, like we've said, there's a lot of things that as a white guy I never think of. And in fact, I got a guest pitch today from someone, talking about these products. And evidently there's a toothpaste that Colgate makes that I guess they announced that it's called Darlie, a Chinese toothpaste brand that used to be called Darky. Which I never knew existed.
Yeah.
And it literally in Chinese translates to black person's toothpaste.
Yeah.
And
I've heard about this.
You go, how is that possible that could even exist and anyone would ever buy it?
Well, I didn't know about Black Pete.
About what?
I didn't know. There's this holiday, this like tradition in, I believe it's the UK, and I don't want to get this wrong, but this whole tradition of Black Pete. Have you ever heard about this? Google this, because I didn't know.
No.
I didn't know this was a thing. It's like, I believe it's around Christmas time.
Okay.
And basically, they dress up in blackface.
Oh. And why would you want to do that?
Well, because they have this whole story of Black Pete, and they're saying that it's not blackface because Black Pete is like in coal, and that's like what this thing is supposed to be about. But like, if you're a Black person in that culture, you've like sort of always been horrified and traumatized by it, and felt discriminated against by it. But they still do this apparently, and I just found out about that last year.
So it's not to imitate a Black person; it's to imitate someone who's worked in the coal mines. Is that what I'm getting?
Well, but that's where it gets controversial, because when you start digging into it, and the ties to slavery and the ties to colonialism, it actually does translate to like racism. I mean, it's really bizarre. I really was quite appalled. I mean, I actually, in some ways, was sort of going like, I don't think that would ever fly in America, and feeling ironically saying it like, okay, but it's not like we don't have a bad problem here, but even that would just be above and beyond for something here. But again, it just speaks to, once that gets folded into the majority, into their traditions and their way of life, it doesn't matter, what the minority, no matter if it's if it's 40% of the population. Right. But if that 60% of the population is winning out and, controlling how the society functions socially, then that type of stuff happens, and it just becomes an accepted norm, even though it's really oppressive and abusive.
No, it's crazy because it's just one of those things where I guess as a white guy, I don't think a lot about that stuff, and I don't think many white folks do. I don't think you see anything. It's the Aunt Jemima bottle's kind of a caricature and kind of
right.
You don't understand why it's there, but no one seems to be offended by it. So there aren't protests or anything, and so you just kind of it is what it is, and you just kind of take these things as it's how it's been. And I guess when you start looking at the statues and all of the monuments and the stuff that are going on, the question that I come back to is the bottle seems kind of meaningless compared to giant statues of Robert E. Lee and all of these Confederate traitors. Where do you begin in fixing this, and then where do you stop?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that it ultimately, the reason why the question of a stopping point, I think, doesn't really have a clear answer, is because so much of what needs to happen is something that is going to be structural change that happens at multiple levels of society. And yes, it has to happen legislatively and through policy, but it also has to happen socially and culturally in our institutions that are outside of government. And so, even though, changing the name of pancake syrup, et cetera, kind of feels, I think, relatively smaller than these larger things we're talking about, like, police brutality and how to actually fix that situation acutely. But I think in terms of like the background noise and moving the whole society towards an evolution, that kind of stuff is important and it will build up over time. But the reason the conversation keeps expanding is because the racism really does come down to our food. And it's not just the box food on the shelves, because me and you were talking about this just a couple of months ago, or maybe a month or two ago, in the context of the pandemic and the meat factories and the essential workers and the migrant workers and the undocumented and all of these people who are expected to still work on the front lines of our economy, in a lot of ways in the food industry.
Right.
That's in many ways what the only thing that's still percolating, is food. So the ways that we are attaching, labor to these certain demographics of, second-class citizenry, and have done that for decades in our society,
Well, from the beginning, I mean, every wave of
Yeah.
immigrants, they're the
Every
ones on the
century.
bottom.
Exactly. But again, that is tied to the very food that we put in our mouths. And so it's not just Aunt Jemima. It's this idea of, I can, pay whatever for my strawberries, and I can, have the convenience of being able to go to these mega grocery stores that have everything I want. But I don't necessarily have to think about the labor that goes into picking all of these fruits and vegetables and all of this, like, farm fresh, organic, blah, 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 that everybody has to have now. And what happens if all of that grinds to a halt? How sufficient are we, to do some of these jobs that we've been outsourcing to the undocumented, that we've been outsourcing to factories in China? All of these things we talked about with manufacturing and the trade agreements and all the jobs that have been lost, things not being made in the USA anymore, et cetera. There's a price for the convenience and wanting things to be, for this great price or whatever, that we don't necessarily want to even pay a livable wage to people who are making all of this stuff and preparing our food, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't decided as a society that those people are important enough. We haven't decided they should have sick, paid leave, et cetera, built into that they should have health care.
Right.
We haven't decided that as a society. So, again, I think that's why we don't really know when it's going to stop. Until we get on a socioeconomic footing where it's not so out of balance between the 1% and the 99%, I think we're going to continue to have these questions, swirling around and trying to fix it as many ways as we can, because that's what's slowing us down and stagnating us as a country.
Yeah, excellent point. I wanted to get your thoughts on Senator Tim Scott's, kind of his statement on this whole both sidism stuff. He said,
don't like him, Rick.
You don't like Tim Scott?
No.
Oh.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to say that.
Oh no, I'm just curious your thoughts, because we hear this a lot from people. The whole there's racism on both sides. Scott says there's plenty of blame of race on both sides, and we need to be more sensitive on the issue of race in this nation. It's kind of insincere, or at least not authentic, to suggest one side has a bigger problem than the other. Is that something you agree with?
No, I firmly disagree with this man. I don't understand anything about this man and what is his purpose in life, because it's so hypocritical, and like literally he's trying to make this both sides case when his colleague or his friend or whatever they call each other, Rand Paul, is like literally holding up an anti-lynching bill in the Senate. They still can't even pass an anti-lynching bill through the Senate. You think that's because of Democrats? Or do you think that's because of Republicans, or both sides? Like, who is he kidding? This is atrocious. He's seen these hate crimes in his own state. And he sat up there and, he serves as a token for them. And I'm not mincing words here, because he's like the only one. Okay, and so he gets to stand up there and be their lone ranger person that says, "Oh no, everything's okay. Don't look over here. We're fine. And if we are doing something, it's exactly what the Democrats are doing, and we're not supposed to pay attention to like everything they're doing on the books institutionally from a policy standpoint to just ensure that apartheid continues indefinitely and Jim Crow continues indefinitely." It's insulting our intelligence, and I think it's even more insulting our intelligence for them to use token black people, Tim Scott, Diamond and Silk, Ben Carson, the list goes on and on. We've already named them so many times.
Yeah, Candace Owens sent me an email today saying
Candace
she's
Owens.
not black.
No, she didn't.
She did. She sent me an email saying she's not black.
Was it spam?
No, it was her fundraising email. I'm on her list.
No, did it really say that?
Yeah, it did. She said, I'm not black, and then you open it up, and it's Joe Biden's statement on the Breakfast Club.
Oh
Obviously.
my God! I hope whatever they're paying her is enough. I really do, because I just honestly I don't know what I don't have a price for my soul like that, but however much these people are getting paid, whatever perks they're getting personally, I honestly, sincerely hope for them that it is enough to fill whatever emotional void is going to have to obviously be there when you alienate, like, your people.
Yeah.
Like this. It's terrible.
It is terrible. But here's the thing. Barack Obama today said help is on the way.
Woo!
And they raised $7.6 million from 175,000 people in their virtual fundraiser, which Biden sorely needs.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I think they're getting a lot of money from unexpected new allies and friends on the Republican side of the aisle. And they may never admit it publicly, and I don't even care, as long as they send their donations and they get registered to vote and they show up and they pull the lever for Joe.
There you go.
Even if they only do it one time in their life, but this is the time to do it.
There you go. And lastly, last question I've got for you. What the hell is going on with Texas? Evidently, hospitalization has increased for 10 consecutive days. Yesterday, I guess you had nearly 5,500 new COVID-19 cases. That's an all-time high. Your city of Houston has seen its positivity rate triple to 9%. And you've got the dean at Baylor College of Medicine saying that Houston could become the worst affected city in America, that they could even rival what we're seeing in Brazil.
I believe it. It's true. It's true. And it's all because, excuse my French, idiot Greg Abbott rescinded and stopped all of the stay-at-home orders and is doing this phase 1 reopening, phase 2 reopening BS. People are acting like, that gives them carte blanche to go back to normal, like the pandemic somehow ended and it's not a thing anymore. And so that's a bad example that was set. He was warned explicitly for months not to do this, and this is the consequence. It's not a mystery. It's not a surprise. I mean, he needs to literally stop being ridiculous, stop kowtowing to Donald Trump, and he needs to reinstate the stay-at-home orders immediately, and definitely by this weekend.
I wouldn't hold my breath, but we shall see. Jane,
I wouldn't hold my breath either, but, that's what the doctors are going to be pushing for. You can bet on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, we've got people who know better.
Right, exactly.
There you go. But as always, I appreciate the time. Really great talking with you.
You too. Have a great week and be safe.
You as well. Our good friend Propane Jane. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day the despised Taft-Hartley Act became law. It was a direct retaliatory response to the 1946 post-war strike wave, where millions walked off the job after waiting years for basic demands. The labor movement mobilized against the slave labor bill through numerous rallies. The AFL joined the CIO in threatening 24-hour strikes across whole industries in protest as the bill wound its way through Congress. 11,000 soft coal miners in Pennsylvania walked out in a spontaneous protest strike earlier in the month. The bill passed over the veto of President Harry S. Truman, who would invoke it a dozen times over the course of his presidency. Many union leaders hailed Truman as a friend of labor for his 11th hour veto. Labor Party advocates were incensed that of the 219 congressional Democrats, 126 voted in favor of the bill. Practically overnight, the labor movement had been pushed back 25 years. Taft-Hartley was nothing short of disastrous for the American labor movement. With the stroke of a pen, the act criminalized many of the actions key to historic union victories in the 30s and 40s. Jurisdictional strikes, secondary boycotts, solidarity strikes, closed shops, and mass picketing were just a few of the most basic trade union activities now outlawed. The act helped fire the first shots of the McCarthy Red Scare by mandating that Union officers file non-communist affidavits with the government, which was later found to be unconstitutional. The act also provided the ammunition needed to strangle strikes by empowering the president to easily acquire strike-breaking injunctions. And it allowed for the rapid growth of right-to-work laws at the state level. And because of Taft-Hartley, the union movement has suffered ever since.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So it looks like Donald Trump is, again, going to court. He is seeking a temporary restraining order against Mary Trump because she's got a tell-all book coming out. He's trying to block that. Mary Trump is the president's niece. And evidently, we now find out she was the one who was leaking all that stuff to the New York Times and everyone else. I highly believe he's going to lose this one as well. I actually have John Bolton lined up for July 1st. So on July 1st, if all goes right, we're going to have John Bolton here on the program to talk about the book. Not sure how it happened, but that's what I'm told. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the news of the day, our good friend Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, that's great. I'll tell you, Rick, now, if you can get Mary, is her last name Trump?
Her last name's Trump.
Okay, if you've got John Bolton, and if you can get Mary Trump, you got to think of a third one, and you've got the trifecta.
Yeah, someone reached out to me out of the blue and said, hey, do you want John Bolton to come on? And I'm going, oh, yeah.
Cool.
I've been dying to ask the simple question of why the hell didn't you testify?
I want to ask him why he moves his glasses up and down all the time.
Hold on, let me write that down. No, but here's the thing. I mean, what is it about Trump and trying to block these books? I mean, it fortunately hasn't happened yet, has it?
No, I mean, Bolton, it's very interesting now. The judge in Bolton's case, because I will predict that if Trump is reelected, Bolton probably will be in the middle of one of those things you're not ever going to be envious of, because I was in the middle of it, of take this or suffer that, which is called a plea deal. I mean, you never know. I would believe that probably they'll go after him, the Justice Department and potentially, but they can't go after his niece, because the judge did make a statement about national, security, but he didn't block the book. So what would be the purpose of blocking her?
Right.
There's no interest of national security.
No, it's just...
Maybe this is the interest of Thanksgiving dinner for the family.
Yeah, you got to wonder how often she had Thanksgiving dinner with him anyway.
Right.
But yeah, it's just another one of those things where you go, don't you have something better to do? There are more than 121,000 people who have died from your bungling of this virus, and I'm sorry, hey, if we just tested less, it'll go away. Isn't doing it for me.
Well, also, if you ignore these books, you're better off. Now,
Yeah.
Bolton was a high-profile thing. But if you're going to go after a court motion, right, you better think you can win it if you're going to go after it. Even in Bolton's case, Trump shouldn't have went after the court motion, gave him more publicity.
Sure.
When I did my book, John Boehner, the speaker, came out, because I have a very unflattering chapter, as you know, on him, and he came out and called me pathetic, and I was in jail, and blah, 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 blah. And it ended up, my book sales spiked the next day.
No, you want someone to do that, which is why, I was wondering why Trump tried to block, Bolton's as well, because look, now you've got a court saying, yeah, it's okay. There's
right.
Yeah.
Sure.
But again, strategy and brains, not something we really put high on the Trump meter.
He would have been better off just to say, look, I mean, and don't go to court against her and just say, look, don't you have those family members that you just don't like? I mean, you could actually, that would be a better defense than what he's saying.
Yeah, she got cut out of the will, something.
Right. So, and he come up with something.
Yeah, I took the last serving of potatoes, something.
Right.
But here again, this is who we have leading our country, and the reason I led into this. But here we are, 133 days from Election Day. And Trump was going to run on the campaign on the economy. Can't do that; it's tanked. Certainly can't run on his leadership, given the fact that more than 121,000 people are dead, and the EU is talking about not letting Americans into their countries. What can he run on?
Well, how about the wall? 3 miles of it. All right. Right. About 3 miles of the new border wall system have been constructed where there were no barriers previous. Right. We have 216 miles where we've had things for forever,
right.
Whatever they are, or fence or whatever. And, of course, now they were asking about the border protection. And the answer by Mark Morgan, the acting commissioner of U.S. Customs, was, this is hair-splitting. It's a false political narrative. From an operational, this is his quote, from an operational law enforcement perspective, there's new miles of wall. Yeah, 3. There's new miles, which could, in your mind, wouldn't you think 400 new miles?
Yeah, well,
so there's 3.
3's plural. I mean, there's more than one. And yet we find out, there was a report, last year that, a $100 reciprocating saw basically undoes whatever the wall does.
Right, exactly.
Because you can cut through it with a $100, battery-operated reciprocating saw.
Right.
Oops.
And then, of course, now President made a visit. He was out to Yuma, Arizona area. I've been out there actually myself when I was in Congress, but he made a visit out there, and I think it's his second trip to Arizona in the last 6 weeks. If that tells you something. There's a reason there.
They're trying to salvage that Martha McSally, which, if you saw her American Trip Act, have you seen this?
No.
Evidently, she's moving forward on the idea of giving every person $4,000 tax credit to go on vacation, to explore America. $4,000 per person. So like my family would get like $9,000 to go on vacation for this year, next year, and the year after, because we need to save the tourism industry. And I'm like, but what if I don't have any vacation?
Right, exactly.
And what if I can't afford to put the money up front? And, what if I don't want to, maybe go to live events and get sick? Is this not the wrong thing at the wrong time? If we're going to spend $50 billion, can you not think of a better way, more useful way to use $50 billion than the prop up Disney and the hotel companies?
Right. And then how would you monitor it? It's a unworkable nightmare.
No, but it's another one of these tax credits that have been designed to make the wealthy even wealthier, because we're going to pay for them to go to Disneyland. Because I'll tell you, at this point, I can't take my kids to Disneyland, even if you're giving me a tax credit.
Well, that's right, and there's no transparency, which I blame the Congress for those who cared in Congress on this one. There's no transparency of where all the money went, with the stimulus package in regards to business, and Congress should have written in that simple clause that you must list all of it, and somehow they're not. So who knows? We're going to find out one day, but who knows how much was just wasted.
Yeah, I mean it's an absolute shame. But as I said a moment ago, Barack Obama said help is on the way. Joe Biden raised $7.6 million. From 175,000 donors with the virtual fundraising event today. There's something that they need.
Yes, they need that, and then I think also rather than just countering all the Trump things, they've got to continue to put together something. And at one point in time, Biden will be out around, and so they've got to have that mantra down. I think also they need to look at what's being done and said about them versus just dismissing the quote crazy man's saying these things, because you can see these trends. The Trump campaign, as you know, Rick, you know retail politics better than anybody I know. The Trump campaign is looking for a message beyond the economic message.
Sure.
And they're trying the wall now. He's been to Arizona twice. Former Governor Sununu, former governor of New Hampshire, came out and he was on the Fox News, of course, and he said that the message has got to be chaos, and if the autonomous zone, and if Joe Biden's in, guess what's going to happen to you? You know, something bad's going to happen to you because he's going to yield to everything that, you know, is going wrong, maybe, you know, when it comes to a protest or something. If something went wrong, it's going to be Joe Biden's fault. And so I think that, you know, they would do themselves well to look at what is said, you know, but not get so into it that their message is gone and they're playing complete defense. They want to be offensive.
Yeah, but you know, Trump's you know, his law and order, you know, iron-fisted thing isn't playing all that well either. And you know, I look at the rally over the weekend that, you know, really kind of disappointing for him since they had to cancel the overflow and the stadium itself, you know, was not really near capacity. So it either told me a couple of things. One, and the more hopeful part of it, maybe people are, you know, kind of concerned that this virus is real, and maybe they're staying the hell away, or maybe people are wising up.
Well, that, and I mean, there's, I think, a wide variety of reasons why they had that turnout, but the important point to this entire thing is why that rally was held and why it was held, you know, this week, you know, this past week. And the reason was to personally energize the president. That's why the campaign did it.
Right.
Which you have to sit there and say, well, why do they have to personally energize him, you know? And it's because things aren't going, you know, correct. And this is an easy prediction. Guess who's going to be terminated as this campaign gets into swing? You know?
The campaign manager.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That's. I'm not a rocket scientist on that.
No. In fact, there was a story today that, you know, he's thinking about quitting. He's thinking about preemptively quitting because he knows his behind's on the line.
Well, he's angered Jared Kushner. And, you know, if you're a world leader, don't anger Jared Kushner. If you're the campaign manager, don't anger Jared Kushner.
Yeah, but, you know, the thing is, you know, the messaging around that rally was just all bad. And I wouldn't have wanted to be anyone on that campaign having to try and push through that giant turd, because there was nothing good coming out of that. And there's still nothing good coming out of it, because, you know, we find out that a couple of the campaign staffers actually showed up at the rally infected with the virus.
Right. There were so many missteps, and it's just like, you know, think about one of your favorite movies you've seen, and if they had a sequel, say 3, you know, you got the first movie, then sequel 2 and 3, right?
Yep.
And they try to use, The Hangover is a good example of the movie. They try to use some of the same scenarios or lines that they used in the first one that were effective, right?
Yep.
And you look at them and go, okay. Well, you know, the whole walk and water explanation, and, you know, President 4 years ago used to tell some of these stories that I would look at it and think, you got to be kidding. But, you know, it sold to the crowd, right? When he would give details about this or what somebody said to him. And they tried to reproduce that with the walk and the water. And it's sort of like looking at version 4 of a movie, saying, you know, okay. I mean, it went on and on to the point I thought, whoever thought this up really needs to be fired, not flown back to D.C.
No, have you seen Biden's ad? He can run and drink water too.
Yes, I saw with he and President Obama running through the White House.
I thought that was hysterical. But, you know, that's what we're going to end up with. Lastly, I've got for you.
Right.
Wanted to get your thoughts on this this attorney, you know, one of the 4 prosecutors who quit the Stone case, and the firing and all that went on Friday. I wanted to get some of your thoughts on that.
Right. Aaron Zielinski, he's the career prosecutor. He's going to tell tomorrow, actually, to the House Judiciary Committee, we know what he's going to say, that Justice Department leadership intervened in the sentencing of Roger Stone. Now, of course, we all knew something went completely haywire, right?
Right.
You know, and they've got his opening statement. So Zielinski's one of the 2 whistleblowers. They're going to testify before the committee about the politicization of the Justice Department. He was a special member of a special counsel of Mueller's team, and I think he resigned in February after the Justice Department did the Stone deal, where they reversed everything. Well, there's a couple of thoughts on this. Number one, we all knew something was not going right. Something smelled with the Roger Stone deal, right? We all knew that. Stone remained loyal to Trump. unlike the president's lawyer, Cohen, who they could care less what happens to him. But Stone was a different ball game. I mean, look, every White House will tell you that we don't interfere with the Justice Department, and that's just not true. Some interfere more. Obviously, this administration interfered directly through Barr with Roger Stone, and it's like it didn't shock me because I know they lie. Justice Department, not all of them, but I mean, it happens over the years. I've seen it. In our case, things happen. The Monsanto lawyer that defended got Monsanto off the hook this year. That's the woman that came out and prosecuted me, Alice Fisher. And we know that she used her connections to get Monsanto off of a criminal hook this year, right? So there's all these politics. I guess what amazes me the most on this, Rick, if you're going to do this and it's Roger Stone, don't leave your fingerprints. All right?
Yeah.
Yeah, don't leave your fingerprints. I think this could, blow up into if they can directly pinpoint this into the White House, not that they can do something about it, but could it be exposed as really an atrocity legally?
Yeah, again, another one of those moments where if you had a functional Democratic Party, maybe you could, hold them accountable.
Well, right.
There you go. But Bob, I appreciate the time as always. Good stuff, man.
Okay, thank you.
Our good friend Bob Ney. Quick break, right back to wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
The official reading was 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit.
Months-long Arctic heat wave delivers all-time record high in Siberia. Extreme heat now kills more Americans than hurricanes and floods. Trump administration rolls back decades-old protections for migratory birds. Plus,
we owe it to future generations to build back better, including a fairer, greener, and a more resilient global economy.
UK builds world's largest liquid air battery.
Liquid air battery?
Yep.
What's that?
A liquid air battery.
All of those mysteries answered and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she doesn't even want wind. She doesn't want those bird-killing machines that go round and round. You want to see a lot of birds that are dead? Go under a windmill sometime.
You want to see a presidential campaign that's dead? Go to Tulsa sometime. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, does Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez really oppose wind power, as Donald Trump says?
No, not at all. At his rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma over the weekend, President Trump repeated his delusional obsession with wind energy and false claims about high numbers of bird deaths. Just FYI, glass buildings and oil and gas fields kill far more birds than wind turbines.
Donald Trump owns a lot of glass buildings, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
And he supports a lot of oil and gas fields as well, doesn't he?
Yep. Of course, Trump omitted the part where his administration just rolled back decades-old migratory bird protections to benefit the fossil fuel industries. The new draft rules allow companies to simply claim they didn't mean to kill any birds, and that's good enough to escape fines and penalties. Plus, the Trump administration's own environmental assessment of the rollback admits that it will result in more bird deaths than under the old rules, and it suggests that there are actually benefits to having fewer birds in the world.
Other than that, he's really opposed to windmills because they kill all of those birds, not because they want to build it outside of his golfing properties offshore.
Right.
I gotcha.
Disturbing heat record in the Arctic Circle. The small Siberian town of Verkhoyansk hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit on Saturday, about 30 degrees hotter than the hottest temperatures for June. Once verified, it will be the all-time record high for the Arctic Circle since record-keeping began in the 1850s.
100 degrees Fahrenheit in Siberia. Did I read that in Miami it has only ever hit 100 degrees once?
Yes. Meteorologists say it's also extremely unusual because this temperature spike has persisted since December. The number and intensity of Siberian wildfires has also increased. Climate scientists say the dramatic swings in temperature in Siberia would only happen once in 100,000 years if it weren't for man-made climate change. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. That is melting permafrost on which much of the Arctic's infrastructure is built. It also releases more climate-warming carbon dioxide and methane, creating a self-reinforcing feedback loop that makes global warming even worse. And now a new study concludes that extreme heat is the biggest public health threat from extreme weather in the United States. The study from Columbia University finds that more Americans have died from extreme heat waves than hurricanes, tornadoes, or floods over the last 10 years. Scientists say that heat waves in cities across the U.S. have tripled in frequency on average over the last 20 years, and that heat waves are getting longer, including dangerous nighttime heat. And both man-made climate change and urbanization contribute to the nighttime heat trend. Florida and Arizona have seen heat-related hospitalizations and deaths double over the last decade. Researchers publishing in the Journal of the American Medical Association in a comprehensive study of 32 million births found that women who were exposed to higher temperatures or air pollution were more likely to give birth to children who were premature, underweight, or stillborn. And like with so many health-related outcomes in the United States, African American mothers and babies were harmed at disproportionately higher rates from the increases in air pollution and heat. But there is some good news, for the UK at least, where construction is underway on the world's largest liquid air battery. The massive project uses excess clean wind and solar energy to compress ordinary air into a liquid, and then, when needed, the air is released back into a gas with the pressure powering a turbine to generate clean, zero-carbon energy right back to the grid. The liquid air battery can store energy for weeks, unlike conventional chemical batteries, and will be able to power 200,000 homes for hours at a time. It's backed with funding from the UK government as part of its shift away from coal. Quite the contrast from the Trump administration.
Yes, it is. And thank you for explaining what a liquid air battery is.
Yep.
I still don't understand it, but it sounds good, so I'll take it. For much more on all of those stories and to help you figure out what a liquid air battery is, please stop by our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, real quick, it looks like Bill Cosby has won the right to challenge his 2018 sexual assault conviction in the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court. Who knows? He may get out. It comes down to money, man. And also, remember the Kids for Cash judge? His name was Michael Conahan. Remember? It's a number of years back where he was a juvenile court judge, had ties with the the for-profit juvenile detention centers, and he would basically, sentence people like first-time offenders like 6 months in kiddie jail, all so that these kiddie jails could make a lot of money, and then they would kick back a boatload of money to him. I'm sure you remember the story. Anyway, he's being released to home confinement because, the virus. He's 68 years old, and they say that he's got some underlying medical conditions that could put him at high risk for complications if he were to contract the disease. And my thought of it, because I'm cruel and heartless, is too damn bad. How about all of those people all those lives that he ruined by locking kids up and putting them into those institutions, and the horrible things that could have happened to them and the trajectory of their lives after that moment? The hell with him. He should spend the rest of his days locked up. Now, he still has 6 years left on his sentence. He should have to do every day of that in jail. I know, but Rick, they're going to put him in. He's going to have home confinement, and you know how bad home confinement is. No, home confinement's not that bad when you consider having to sit in jail. Look, I just sat for 2 months locked up in my own house. Wasn't horrible. I enjoyed parts of it. Hell of a lot better on any day, even when the kids were fighting, than sitting in jail. Just my thought. I'm against it. I want him to rot. Just my thought. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
He made a shit ton of money off